Hello, 1517 Podcasts listeners. This is Caleb Keith, director of the 1517 Podcast Network, with a special announcement. Throughout the entire month of June, the Podcast Network at 1517 is hosting a special fundraiser. During the time of this fundraiser, two generous donors are doubling the impact of your generosity by matching dollar for dollar gifts given up to $75,000. The Podcast Network has a goal, including this match, to raise $150,000 during the month of June. These funds will play a crucial role in expanding our network onto additional platforms like YouTube and strategically reaching new audiences with direct marketing and with the creation of new types of content. Your support isn't just figurative. It's a tangible investment in the people and tools necessary to maintain and expand the work of our podcasts. People like the hosts of your favorite shows and the editors and marketing and creative teams behind the scenes that support our podcast throughout the years. Please go to 1517.org/donate-podcast today to help us reach this $150,000 goal. Thank you for being an integral partner of the 1517 Podcast community and for your unwavering dedication to sharing the pure gospel through our shows.
Welcome to another episode of 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. 40 Minutes in the Old Testament is a 1517 Podcast Network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. And while you're over there, make sure you check out everything else that 1517 is doing. You know, it's not just a podcast network. It's got articles, it's got videos, it's got academies, it's got events, all the things. Go over there, check it all out. And if you'd like to become a donor to support all of that free stuff, you can do that by clicking that donate link, and you can do a one-time gift or become a reoccurring supporter. We very much appreciate those of you who do that. Chad, we are in Job 31. The title of the chapter is Job's Final Appeal. So we're coming down to Job making some final arguments here. Last week, Job was starting to get a little melancholy. He definitely was starting to think back on the good old days and how those days are gone, and God has not seemed to be treating him the way that he used to, and he only knows how to sing sad songs now. If he tries to sing any kind of song besides that, it just ends up being a sad song. And he's hanging out with ostriches apparently. And if you don't know that reference, you have to go back. That one, I think that one has been lost to us. I don't think we know exactly.
Just doesn't work with us anymore.
Doesn't work. But apparently, if your buddies are ostriches, that's who you're hanging out with, then you're in a Job-like situation.
Pretty bad place. Yeah. Just, line doesn't make it into country songs anymore.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
That would be a
Lost
good
my truck, lost my girlfriend, just hanging out with ostriches.
That would be funny if you had like a really sad song. A country artist should do this. If you're listening to this country artist, you don't have to put that line in the song. It can just be like a really sad song about losing everything, and you should just title it "The Companion of Ostriches."
Ostriches.
And like everyone would be like, "Why is this song called this?"
Yeah. Well, maybe somebody out there is a country artist. They'll take you up on it. Yeah. So we the last couple chapters, Job, first of all, thought back to the good old days, as you indicated, and then he sings his country song in chapter 30. And in this final chapter, it's not the last time Job will speak, because, of course, he has a couple of responses after God begins to speak to him. But this is the last of his long speeches, I guess we could say. This is the final of the speeches between Job and his three friends. And we're going to have a surprise newcomer in the next chapter who has a lot to say, and no one's going to talk back to him at all. He's going to be completely ignored. In fact, he's not going to come up at the last chapter. God's not going to talk about him. Job's not going to respond to him whatsoever. So we're going to meet this new character when we get to Job chapter 32. But first of all, Job chapter 31 is what's sometimes called among biblical scholars a negative confession. And it's basically follows the form of, if I have done X, then let Y befall me. So it's not simply saying, I'm not a murderer, I'm not a thief, I'm not an adulterer, I'm not whatever it might be. He is in the most emphatic sort of way saying, if I have done such and such, or if I behaved in such a way, or even if I have within my heart thought certain things or desired certain things, then let such and such happen to me. Now, it doesn't follow that exact form throughout the entirety of the chapter, but that's the basic overall pattern. In fact, I was checking this morning, and the Hebrew particle, which is just im, that's translated if ordinarily, occurs 17 times in this chapter. And 16 of those are translated if. So just to kind of give you a flavor for this, begins in verse 5. If I have walked with falsehood, verse 7. If my step has turned aside, verse 9. If my heart has been enticed, verse 13. If I have rejected the cause of my servants, so on and so forth. So you have 16 of those throughout the entire chapter, in which Job is talking about basically his ethical purity, his life of righteousness that we heard a lot about back in chapter 29. But he's going to start out here in these opening verse, and then really opening, I guess, 4 verses, by kind of setting the stage initially by talking about his refraining from, in fact, that's too weak of a term, not just refraining from lust, but making a covenant with his eyes so that he would not lust. So that's the way it starts out. I'll read the first 4 verses. If I have made a covenant with my eyes, how then could I gaze at a virgin? What would be my portion from God above and my heritage from the Almighty on high? Is not calamity for the unrighteous and disaster for the workers of iniquity? Does not he see my ways and number all my steps? So the verb that's translated here as how then could I gaze at a virgin? That's translated a lot of different ways. In fact, it occurs several different times, even in the book of Job. In fact, in the last chapter, verse 20 has, I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, this is Job talking to God, I stand and you only look at me. That's the same Hebrew verb, same verbal form. So it carries the idea of looking intensely, looking closely. Here, of course, he's talking about not just looking intensely or looking closely at a virgin, but looking with some sort of lustful intent, which is often the way this is translated. So that's the way it starts out. Job is saying, listen, I have not even taken my eyes and directed them to look closely at a young woman so as to lust after her. So he phrases this in the strongest of ways with this idea of an eye covenant, so that he will not look at her. And of course, this is reflected even, of course, in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus talks about looking at a woman to lust after her and having already committed adultery with her in your heart. Then he follows that up with saying, basically, if I did, well, then I would deserve the kind of things that God talks about that he talks about in verse 3. So calamity and disaster, because God sees our ways and numbers all our steps. So that's kind of setting the tone for the rest of the chapter that is to come.
I'm pretty sure this is where, do you remember the, I think it is, I don't know if people are still doing this or not, but back in the day, there used to be like this software or something that you could load up on your computer called Covenant Eyes. You remember that? And
yeah, I don't, but yeah, that has to be where that came from.
Yeah.
Blocks certain websites or whatever that you.
I think it's like it sends like it'd be like, I think I don't know how it works. It's something like if like I get you to download it and I download it, and then like we just know what everything.
Oh, okay. I see, like accountability kind of deal. Like I can see your search history.
Yeah.
Or your and you can see mine.
Yeah.
That kind of accountability. Yeah. Yeah, probably so.
But it's got to be where that name came from, right?
Oh yeah, it's got to be where that name came from, and it's a unique expression too. I don't know that anything like that is said elsewhere in the scriptures. The idea of making a covenant with any body part,
Yeah.
make a covenant with my feet that they should not walk in the paths of unrighteousness, or make a covenant with my hand that it should not work iniquity, or my ears that they should not listen to slander, whatever it is. I don't remember any other biblical occurrence where you have a covenant, me making a covenant basically with myself,
Yeah.
so as to refrain from a certain behavior. But yeah, that is that's a background for this idea of covenant eyes. So that's kind of getting the chapter rolling. Now, beginning with verse 5, he's going to shift into this framework of a negative confession. So I'll read 5 through 8 next. If I have walked with falsehood, and my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance, and let God know my integrity. So that verse is in parentheses. And then he goes on, if my step has turned aside from the way, and my heart has gone after my eyes, and if any spot has stuck to my hands. So all of this kind of leading into, so if I've done blank, blank, and blank. Verse 8 then has the then forming from this if statement. Then let me sow and another eat, and let what grows from me be rooted out. So this is, I don't know if this is to be understood kind of literally in the sense of, let my crops fail, or if it's more metaphorical, maybe it's a little bit of both. But he's basically here saying, if I have acted with others falsely, deceitfully, if I have turned aside from the right and the proper and the unselfish and the honest way, and he describes this in different sorts of ways, like his heart going after his eyes or spots sticking to his hand. If any of that's happened, well, then let all my labors be in vain, basically. If I'm a farmer and I go out and work hard and plow and sow the seed and do all the things necessary, well, then let somebody else come along and harvest that and eat it. In fact, even let what grows from me be rooted out, so my crops be ruined in some way. So this is Job stating in the strongest possible terms that he has not done these things, of course. He's calling an imprecation upon himself, a curse upon himself, if he has, in fact, done any of this. And of course, the logical conclusion to his words is that he has not done any of this. So that's the way that starts out.
What's interesting about some of this, though, is that based on his friends' arguments about like how this God works, and like, hey, Job, you must be unrighteous because all this stuff is happening to you. You do wonder as he's saying this stuff, like, hey, if I've done this, let bad things happen to me. If his friends are like, that's what we've been saying, dude. Bad things are happening to you.
That's what we've been saying for the last 30 chapters to you, Job.
Hey,
take a look around, right?
If I had done anything bad, then like made all my crops be destroyed, and they're like, well, they were. So
yes, you're not helping your argument here, Job.
Yeah.
So that's the first if then, or the first couple of if thens. Now the second section, or third section, however you want to number this, is going to revert back to the lust part with which he began, with the whole covenant eyes thing going on. But here's going to focus upon not just kind of lusting after a virgin, which is how the chapter began, but in committing adultery with his neighbor's wife. And here's how he frames that. If my heart has been enticed toward a woman, and if I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down on her. For that, and I'm thinking that is referring back to adultery. If he's committed adultery, for that would be a heinous crime, and that would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges. For that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon, and it would burn to the root of all my increase. So here he's saying, and it's not, just notice this, it's not just saying if I have committed adultery, like literally, physically, but he even talks about if his heart has been enticed toward a woman. Again, that's kind of that. You begin to pick up on the fact that what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, where he kind of gets to the very root cause of all these external sins. I mean, that's reflected already in the Old Testament. Jesus wasn't the first to say you can commit adultery in your heart. Job already says that right here. So if I've done that, if I have had adulterous desires, or if I have committed, lain in wait at my neighbor's door, is just, of course, it's the idea that he's waiting for his neighbor to leave so he can go in and commit adultery with his neighbor's wife. If I've done that, he says, then let my wife grind for another, let others bow down on her. Grinding here is most likely, all the scholars I've checked on this understand this as a sexual euphemism. I mean, you do grind grain, of course, with stones and whatnot, but this is probably nothing but a sexual euphemism that's used here, especially when you have the second part of that verse saying, let others bow down on her. So, in other words, kind of a eye for an eye type deal, lex talionis. If I have committed adultery with another man's wife, well, then let another man or other men commit adultery with my wife. So kind of, eye for eye, adultery for adultery going on here.
What's weird is I think that I don't think we talked about this on the show, but there are certain like some rabbis or just other commentators that will make this distinction between like Christians and like in Judaism and say that the big distinction is that Jesus comes along and all of a sudden like your desires and the things you think about and stuff can be sin, whereas before that it didn't matter if you had any of those things. All that matters is what you did. Like as long like no sin is committed until there's an action, and that's just like not the case. And you did not. It's not true that Jesus came along and then just like now it might be true that the people had not been taught that, they weren't hearing that. I mean, Jesus says, "You have heard it said this, but I say this," and certainly that this was not like an explicit thing that was being taught by like the scribes or the Pharisees or anything like that. But the fact that it's entirely new and didn't exist in the Old Testament is just not true.
Well, no, I mean, and I don't know, maybe this came up in the discussion that you heard, but I mean, how do they even get away from thou shalt not covet?
Yeah.
I mean, coveting is not an external act. It's an
I believe they
interior
said,
disposition.
I believe that the argument that did come up, and the argument was, coveting is not a sin until you like take something that doesn't belong to you, and you're like, well, that's a different command that was before that.
That would be stealing. Yeah.
That's redundant.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, even the coveting is already, and rightly, that's the end of the Ten Commandments, as it were, kind of grabbing everything. You're saying, yeah, well, you shouldn't commit these external acts, but the problem originates way before then. It's in the covetous desire.
This is why Paul picks that one. When Paul's explaining what the law did to him, he doesn't say the law said don't steal, and that's when I realized, because maybe he could just not steal. Maybe he was able to pull that off or whatever. That's not the example he uses. He says when the law says don't covet, it produced all kinds of covetousness in me. Why did he use that one? Well, that's because that's an internal thing, right? That's the thing that he was like, what? Okay, I read that and maybe up until that point, I was able to deceive myself and be like, check, 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 check. And then it said don't covet, and I was like, oh.
Yeah. Good luck with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, what Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount is he's not, as it were, taking the law a step further. He's showing the law always took a step further.
Yeah.
It always pointed toward the interior will and desire, whether that's lust or greed or hate or anything else. I mean, that's where all of this originates. That's the seed that bears fruit in the external actions. You don't commit external actions unless it's a rash action, unless there's been some thought or desire in your heart with regard to this.
Well, and even Jesus saying, you have heard it said, but I say, well, who is he? Well, he's the guy that originally said. So,
Yes,
so it's not like he's saying something new. It's said if I wrote something, because if God, I've said this before, if God has a finger, it belongs to Jesus. So if he's carving something in stone with his finger, that's the finger of Christ. But if I write something and then some other people go out there and start teaching the thing that I wrote, and then I come along later and say, hey, you've been hearing from these teachers, they say this, but I say this about the thing that I originally said. Like, all I'm doing is telling you what the actual intent of the thing is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And also, I mean, this is a bit of a side tangent, but he who gave the law can also abrogate it. For instance, I mean, he can declare certain foods clean and unclean, as he did. Then he can also come along in the Gospels and declare all foods clean, which he also did. That's the prerogative of the lawgiver to take certain temporary laws that were given only to the people of Israel, and then to say, okay, that was certainly in effect under this covenant, and now it's no longer in effect because things have changed. Same thing with circumcision. Same thing with other ceremonial kind of laws.
You might want to pull your ox out of a pit, even on Saturday.
Even on Saturday. That's right. So anyway, that's a section on lust and adultery. Verse 12 says that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon. We have talked about that word before. It's just I don't want to say just a synonym for Sheol, because it has a more sinister, negative connotation to it. But here it seems to be used as basically that same kind of meaning. Abaddon is literally in Hebrew means the place of destruction. So be a fire that consumes down to this place of destruction. Verse 13 is going to pick up with Job basically saying if he has acted in such a way that is unjust, I guess is one way that you could summarize this.
Do you think it's this, Chad? I've always thought that he makes the transition here. So you have a distinction between like sins of omission and sins of commission. So here, like, Job starts by saying, like, I haven't done these bad things. And now he's moving and says, not only have I not done these bad things, but I also have not failed to do good things.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on here. Because he says, if I have rejected the cause of my manservant and my maidservant, when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not he, I love this line, this is verse 15. Did not he who made me in the womb make him, that is to say, my servant? Did not he who made me in the womb also make my servant? And did not one fashion us in the womb? That's a powerful verse. That indicates that already in the Old Testament you had this idea that it doesn't matter what your station in life is, whether you are the master or the servant, you share a common humanity, because God made one as well as the other. So here he's saying, listen, if I have servants, just like, of course, almost any one of means had slaves or servants in the ancient world. Not just in the ancient world, but I mean, this is, of course, common throughout world history. So but Job is saying, listen, I have these manservants and I have these maidservants, but they were not treated as just kind of property. Because if they had an issue, they thought that I was not taking care of them, or they thought that I was mistreating them, or they thought that I was withholding something from them that they needed, whatever the cause might be or the complaint might be. Job is saying, when they brought that to me, then I listened and I acted on that. And he's saying, if I didn't, then where would I go when God rises up in judgment against me? And when he makes inquiry with regard to me, there's no way that I could answer him. So Job acts toward them with an understanding that they are to be treated as those who share his common humanity. So it's kind of a do unto others as you would have them do unto you, golden rule kind of approach to dealing with people that Job could have taken advantage of, because after all, they were his servants. But he did not. Instead, he treated them as human equals with regard to their complaints. So that's 13 through 15. He's going to continue. If I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless has not eaten of it. And then this is another parenthesis in verse 18. For from my youth the fatherless grew up with me as with a father, and from and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. There's a hyperbolic statement. I wasn't even born yet. Listen, people. I would say I was not even born yet, and I was already taking care of the widow.
I was helping widows in utero.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, that's verse 18. Go on here. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or the needy without covering, if his body has not blessed me, or if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, because I saw his help in the gate, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be broken from its socket. For I was in terror of calamity from God, and I could not have faced his majesty. That's a long section. That's 17 through 23. But it's all basically saying, or 16 through 23, excuse me. This is Job's way of saying, if anyone who was economically disadvantaged or was in such a situation where they could easily have been taken advantage of, such as widows or orphans, if those kinds of people in those kinds of desperate situations needed something from me, well, then I gave it to them. I took care of them. I gave to the poor. When the eyes of the widow were looking toward me, I took care of them. He says, from my youth, the fatherless grew up with me as with the father. So he's emphasizing the fact that those who were in need were met with their need by him over and over, whoever they might have been. In fact, they blessed him because of the way that he took care of them. And we have a clear lex talionis, eye for an eye thing going on here in verse 21 and 22, because he says, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, then he goes on. So if he's used his hand in the wrong sort of way, evil or sinister sort of way, then verse 22, let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be broken from his socket. So it's not even becoming an eye for an eye, but it's like a shoulder blade for a hand and an arm for a hand. He takes it up a step, as it were. If my hand is done wrong, then let my whole arm perish, in other words. So another section where he's talking more about kind of sins of commission rather than sins of omission.
Yeah. This is you've probably been in these situations, right? Where you're talking to someone, I don't know, maybe they don't believe you or something, and you say, like, if I'm lying, God can strike me dead. Or
strike me dead, yeah.
Yeah, so my dad, Job's over here. If I've done this, let my shoulder blade fall off.
It's a graphic image.
Yeah, just slide right off, huh? And yeah, but this is all Job's saying. I'm righteous in the sense that I haven't done bad things, but I'm also righteous in the sense that, like, I've not failed to do any of the things that I ought to do. This is this sort of, because it'd be easy if you're, I don't know, if Job was a guy of means and he had a lot of power and stuff, and just say, like, hey man, I was cool. Like, I didn't go around doing bad things.
Mm-hmm.
I was just living in my place and minding my own business. But no, Job wasn't minding his own business. Job was out there tending to the business of other people. That's his whole argument. It's like, no, I didn't just sit around and be innocent, but I actually was out there doing righteous deeds.
Yeah, I mean, he's I like these sections of Job because it demonstrates that he was a not only a willing but almost kind of a joyful, you might even say a zealous patron of people that needed his help. He didn't just simply refrain from evil, but he went out of his way to do good. And in that way, I mean, it really paints the picture of Job that we are given in Job chapter 1, where he's not only blameless, he's not only righteous, but remember back then he was like praying for his kids. What if they curse God in their hearts? He's doing everything that he can to make sure that he cares for his family and for other people also.
Well,
okay, so 20.
Well, there's this. Now you're going to see like a different transition, right? So you had like, I didn't do bad things, I didn't fail to do good things, and now and it's interesting that this is sort of he kind of goes to this next, because this is a big one, even though you might think like this one is not as big as the rest. But Job understands that, okay, well, maybe my worship was messed up. So maybe I was an idolater. So maybe I could not do bad things. I could do good things. Maybe I was like, my worship was wrong. Was I worshiping the wrong things? Did I have a wrong view of God? And that's what Job said. No, wasn't an idolater either.
No, he says, verse 24 through 28, if I have made gold my trust, or called fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because my wealth was abundant, or because my hand had found much. So there you have more of a focus upon like material stuff. So his gold, his fine gold, his wealth, all these things.
Yeah. And by trust, I mean that's just for us, Chad. We would say like, what does it mean to have an idol? It means to like trust in something other than God, right?
Yeah, to use New Testament language here, he's saying, if I have made mammon my God, is basically what he's saying in these first couple of verses. And then he's gonna build on the same idea of idolatry, except it's gonna shift to like solar idolatry, worshiping the sun or the moon, of course, which was hugely popular in the ancient world. Because he goes on to say, if I have looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand. I'll come back to that in a second. So if all of that's happened, then this also would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for I would have been false to God above. So he starts out with mammon kind of stuff, gold, fine gold, wealth. So if I've made that my trust, that my God, or if I have engaged in the worship of astral deities, which is kind of what is being described here with the sun and the moon. The sun was in many different ancient cultures, everywhere from Mesopotamia to Egypt, all over Canaan. I mean, the sun was worshipped, and you can kind of understand why. I mean, if you don't have the sun, you don't have life. And so the sun was worshipped in a variety of different forms, right? Different names. And you have instances of sun worship happening in the Old Testament itself among the Israelites. And so he's saying, if I've looked at them as basically gods and worshiped them, and then he uses this language, "My mouth has kissed my hand." It's a bit of an enigma. There is a verse in Hosea which talks about kissing the calves. These would be the golden calves that they had in the northern kingdom under Hosea. So this is some sort of worship that involves, I don't know, it's throwing kisses or literally kissing a statue or whatever it is. This is some sort of ritual pose that's connected with idolatry when he talks about my mouth kissing my hand. And he says, if I've done all of that, if engaged in idolatry, then he says this also would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges. Now that same line was used a few verses earlier, back in verse 11, to describe what he would deserve should he engage in adultery. So that shouldn't be any surprise, because if there's any two sins which are basically two sides of the same coin, from the biblical perspective, it's idolatry and adultery. Of course, idolatry is frequently described as engaging in adulterous actions, going whoring after other gods. So he uses that exact same line in verse 11 and verse 28, one having to do with adultery, one having to do with idolatry, because, of course, in the biblical perspective, these are nothing more than different manifestations of the same thing.
You know, Chad, if you haven't done the bad things, and you haven't failed to do the good things, and you're worshiping the right God, well, maybe this is it. Maybe you rejoice. You don't do anything. You don't bring anything about, but maybe you get some satisfaction when people that hate you, maybe some people that have been evil to you, not people that you hate, but people that have hated you. Maybe you get a little satisfaction when bad things happen to them, and so maybe this is the sin. This is the smallest of all sins, where you maybe revel a little bit in the fall of those who are your enemy or hate you. Maybe that's what he's done. I think these transitions are really interesting, because you're like, okay, because imagine you have someone that hates you, And then, things don't go well for him. And like Job was like, now normally it'd be a natural thing to be like, well, I mean, doesn't hurt my feelings. That person that was hated me and was whatever. Maybe they say terrible things about you or whatever. Well, Job's gonna address that. Like he's not unrighteous in that way either.
No, this is so this will be verse 29 and following. The Germans have this wonderful word for this, Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Rejoicing over the misfortune of others, especially people that are in some way against you. Yeah, so this is biblical Schadenfreude going on here. If I have rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, or exulted when evil overtook him. Again, a parentheses. I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. He goes on. If the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been filled with his meat? The sojourner has not lodged in the street. I have opened my doors to the traveler. If I have concealed my transgressions as others do. Now, in the Hebrew, this is literally as like Adam did. So if I've concealed my transgressions like Adam did, by hiding my iniquity in my heart, because I stood in great fear of the multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, so that I kept silence and did not go out of doors. So it kind of leaves off there. There's no like then to this statement. So this kind of breaks the formula here. He doesn't say, if I've done all this, then let some disaster befall me. But you get the point. If I've engaged in the delight over the downfall of others, even people who hated me, or, as he says in some of the other verses, if there's been anybody who lives in kind of my house, he pictures it here as a tent, but my property, my area. If there's been anyone who has gone hungry, or anyone who's been turned away from my door when they needed a place to stay, if I've not confessed my transgressions when they needed to be confessed, and all of that, then it kind of assumed the then is coming, then let some sort of punishment befall me. So that finishes at least most of the if then. He's got one more at the end. But before he gets there, he's going to basically kind of formalize this negative confession by, as it were, at least verbally signing this agreement. It's like he's written this all down and he's got, listen, I am so sincere here that I'm going to put my John Henry right on this verbal document that I've just given to you. He says, oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it on me as a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. Yeah, so this is Job kind of doubling down on everything, saying, listen, if I've signed this, here's my signature. Literally in Hebrew, that's my my towel. So this is in Paleo Hebrew. So in like the older way that Hebrew was written, in the old style of Hebrew, this looked like a cross or a T. The tau. That's a final letter of the Hebrew alphabet. If you remember back in Ezekiel 9, when there's going to be an angel that goes through the city of Jerusalem and puts a mark on the foreheads of the men who don't engage in idolatry. That's the same word that's used there. It's a tau, so a T or a cross. But it's also kind of used in the sense of you make your mark, your signature, and that's what's used here. So here's my tau. Here's my signature on this document. He says, if there's an indictment against me, then you kind of wear it as a scarlet letter. I'd carry it on my shoulder, right? I'd bind it as a crown on my head. If such a document were produced, an indictment were produced against me.
Yeah, I mean, Job is speaking with a lot of confidence here. I mean, like he's basically saying that he would go march right up to God, like he was some kind of prince, and know that there is. And here's one of the things I like. Like Job here is not saying that he's not a sinner, but he is saying that, like, I haven't done any of these things, and this is how you would generally describe me. And what is also true is, like, I would walk up to God with confidence because Job does not believe, and this seems to be the case. I would walk up to him knowing that I had not a single unconfessed sin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've hidden nothing.
Yeah. It's important to remember that, because people do sometimes get the impression that Job is saying he's sinless. He's not. He's in fact, he's confessed his sins more than once in the book, right? Yeah. He's just saying that, listen, I'm not harboring some kind of secret unconfessed sin. I've told God about all this. And then he finishes this out with 38 through 40. And this is it. I mean, this is the last of his words within these long, drawn-out speeches that we've been covering these last few weeks or months, however long it's been. If my land has cried out against me, and its furrows have wept together, if I have eaten its yield without payment and made its owners breathe their last, let thorns grow instead of wheat and foul weeds instead of barley. Seems a strange way to end, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like you would have ended with the previous section here, but this is the way he finally shifts kind of to the land and to its even its furrows, and basically saying, listen, if even the land, I've talked about people, I've talked about neighbors, I've talked about servants, I've talked about the poor, I've talked about all these various people. He's like, listen, if even the land has an issue with me, if the furrows of the land have an issue with me, then let me receive my due recompense because of whatever wrong that I have committed. So that's why he's going to wrap this up. And then finally, we have these 6 words. This is the very end of Job 31. The words of Job are ended. He has rested his case. And what a case it's been. Now, of course, the book isn't over. The very next chapter says that not only did Job stop talking, but his 3 friends also stopped talking. But a fifth guy comes up that we're going to hear a lot about, because he's got several speeches to come, a fellow by the name of Elihu. But Elihu's going to have to bide his time until next episode, since our 40 minutes is up.
Yeah. Elihu's gonna bust in here, and he's upset with everybody.
He's mad. Yeah.
Yeah. He's not
angry.
He's not on anyone's side. He's upset with Job. He's upset with. I think he does think that Job's 3 friends are not wise. I guess. Right. He's pretty frustrated with their ignorance and their inability to get this job done, and so we're gonna hear from him, and we'll hear from him while everyone else seemingly ignores him, but we'll hear what he has to say.
Right.
All right, man.
Until then,
I'll see you next week.
All right, see you then. Hello, 1517 podcast listeners. This is Chad Bird, co-host of 40 Minutes in the Old Testament, with an announcement from the 1517 Podcast Network. Throughout the entire month of June, the Podcast Network at 1517 is launching a special fundraiser, and I need your help. Every dollar you contribute will be matched by 2 generous donors, doubling the impact of your generosity. The Podcast Network needs to raise $150,000 in an effort to support the ongoing creation and expansion of our shows. The funds raised will play a crucial role in expanding our network onto additional platforms, such as YouTube, and strategically reaching new audiences with the gospel. Your support isn't just a figurative donation. It's a tangible investment in the people and tools necessary to maintain and expand the work of our podcast. Please help us to reach our $150,000 goal. Simply visit www.1517.org/donate-podcast today. Thank you for being an integral partner of the 1517 podcast community and for your unwavering dedication to sharing the pure gospel through our shows.